Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to listen to is an episode of Why Left that happened on a live stream a couple of days ago. I'm publishing it out of order ahead of a lot of the other episodes just because we're kicking off 2025. If you want to get involved, now's the time. Benjamin is going to lay out the plan for his Intro to Political Theory course, and I'm going to be laying out the plan for my Core Concepts at Theory Underground course, which will both happen throughout the year over the course of 12 months so that it's bite-sized chunks, not too much, not TMI, right? Like, we're trying to make this work for busy people. So if you want to kind of hear about it and get a sense for what's going on, this is the place to do that. The other thing, I think I do get into this in the episode somewhat, but it's just really important to mention that people who are accessing Benjamin's course or my course get access to Nina Power's Philosophy of Nature course, as well as Mikey's Intro to Land and Intro to Žižek courses. So you get access to a lot of stuff with the $50 a month subscription. If you want our supervisions, well, then you go up to the higher tiers. But yeah, we're really just trying to take something that's worth thousands of dollars, break it up over time for busy people, and make it cheap and accessible. So, listen to this episode just to kind of get a sense for whether it's right for you or not. All right, enjoy.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And I'm David McKerracher. You're listening to Why Left?
So today on Why Left, we're going to talk a bit about the 12. I'm doing this course for Theory Underground, Intro to the History of Political Theory. 12 essential theorists. There are a couple of different names kind of floating around for it. But we're going to talk a little bit about the 12 that I picked for this course that I'm going to teach. It's going to be one theorist per month. So for those who are hardcore and they want to write an essay about each theorist and have me look at it and give them the Oxbridge-style supervision on it, it'll just be one topic a month, which is much less than full-time students have to do. It should be pretty reasonable. And
just
I picked
2,000
12.
words.
Yeah, just 2,000 words, nothing too crazy. And I picked these 12 different theorists to kind of give you an introductory major thinker in 12 different traditions. I said, what are the 12 traditions in political theory, the 12 theorists that you would need to get started in each of those traditions? And I made some controversial choices. When you cut it down to 12, you can't necessarily do everybody. And you also need enough difference among the theorists. They have to be different enough from each other. So you don't want to just keep picking the same kinds of people over and over just because they're big names. If they would be plausibly in the same tradition, I went, okay, Rousseau, Kant, or Hegel, one of them, not all three for this course. Maybe all three later for a different course, but not for this one. Who are we starting with? I went with Rousseau. I think he's the one. He's the first of those three, and he's the one that really kicks off that way of thinking about politics, right? Doesn't mean Kant and Hegel aren't incredibly important canon thinkers, but they don't go in this course, maybe later, right? And, some of the cuts that I made were very hard. And some of them, Dave was like, why? Why have you done this?
I was like, Hume over Locke. I was shook. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave's sitting here going, come on, like Locke, everybody will like it if you teach Locke. Everybody knows about Locke. And I go, well, but I want to do Hume and Marsilius of Padua. And Dave's like, nobody knows who Marsilius of Padua is. How are we supposed to sell that? But I think that there's a case to be made for it. And I think that in making that case, we'll have an interesting conversation that is valuable, that we can't otherwise have if I just sit around and do whoever it is that most people think I should do.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not so worried about selling the course because I think mainly the people who've been excited for your political theory trilogy since we did those 3 streams over the summer, those people haven't gone away. They've only gone up in number. And yeah, I wanted to I just like sort of my way of getting situated in a field is to understand those kind of choices, right? Like I'm more interested in those choices almost than the thinkers themselves. Like and I don't care about political theory in the abstract. I care about Benjamin Studebaker's political theory. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I know you're going to take a more like this kind of teaching approach where you just give each one their best treatment, and sometimes we won't know what you think or whatever. But but those kinds of choices are like so interesting. And yeah, because I mean, I'd never heard of John Locke before I ended up reading him. And then the second treatise on government was so interesting. I was like, well, what's the first one like? And I mean, come on, how many people read those? And I was blown away. But when you were explaining to me your thinking, I mean, I'm just absolutely delighted because like there's this giant chunk of history where I've got a couple of names sprinkled through it that I haven't really read. I've only read fragments from them, and it's nice to have another name in there or two, And Marsilius is definitely one of them, And what you were saying is like he's doing things that other people attribute to later thinkers, way before they are, and he's doing it because of historical necessity in a sort of sense, right? Fascinating. And the little history lessons that I was getting just asking you these questions to me is like one of the most rewarding things that you do, like the way that you're able to tell a story with like the most dramatic moments from history so that these thinkers are contextualized. It's the best thing ever. And to me it's like it's kind of like Dan Carlin's hardcore history podcast, except not except like political theory informed,
Yeah, and this is going to be a major part of the lecturing for this course, is to situate you in the context which gives rise to the thought. So there's going to be some talk about, why is Marsilius thinking this at this particular time? To get that, you have to know something about the time. So when I do Marsilius, a significant part of the lecture will be to actually give you a sense of what's going on in the 14th century in Europe. So I'll have to lay some of that out. And I think that'll be fun. There will be a kind of history component, so you'll get some context. I will, of course, give you, some of the different interpretations that are out there. I won't really tell you what to think in the lecture because I want you to be free to write something up and to read it yourself and to think about it yourself. But I do want to give you the context. I want you to know what's going on and what some of these terms mean in that time. What is it in response to? What's it connected with? Because often if we hop onto an old text and we don't know anything that's going on, we assume that the words mean something like what they mean now. Because what else are we to think, right? So part of the function will be to kind of get you in the headspace of, who are the people for somebody like Marsilius? It's not necessarily who you think they are, right? Not necessarily, right? And, when we're talking about knowledge and who's got knowledge and who doesn't, what are they talking about there? Are they just talking about facts or are they talking about something else? Marsilius is just a fascinating thinker. This idea that there's a community of knowers out there and that it's the community of knowers that has knowledge, not any given person, right? And so then there's this question of, are you in a community of knowers? You don't have a people if you don't have a community of knowers. There's an actual relationality there. It's not just a box of stereotypes based on, garbage like, language or religion or, not to say that these things are garbage, but, oftentimes people will just throw together a bunch of cultural signifiers and go, come on, that's a people. It's, that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you consider a bunch of demographic categories all at once. No, a people for Marsilius is an actual group of people engaged in a common discussion that produces actual knowledge about the totality. It's a tradition, intellectually, spiritually, politically. It has these components to it. We never talk about it like that these days. It's always some sloppy list of stuff that any person can feel like they're part of if they happen to have been born in the place or they happen to be, in some way genetically they look like people. That's not what people means. Not at all. It has a lot to do with community. We'll talk about things like the church community. What is that? One of the big differences between, some of this Protestant theory that comes along later And the Catholic theory is that the Catholic theory is premised on the idea that the church is a community. And because it's a community, it knows stuff, right? And if you are not getting trained in that setting and you just read the text on your own, you don't know anything because you're not in the community. You can only claim to have knowledge of the text in that setting when you're in dialogue with the other people, because knowledge is socially produced, right? If knowledge is socially produced, right, and the church claims it has the only kind of community which can produce this knowledge, right? Then the question is there another kind of community out there that can have knowledge? Or outside the church, are you just completely bereft? So part of what Marsilius will be doing is talking about the politics. Politics is a community, political communities. Do you have a community of the realm, of the empire, the Holy Roman Empire, that is separate and distinct from perhaps prior to the church community? Are there multiple competing sites of knowledge, socially produced knowledge? Because a lot of this old theory is about who actually knows what we should do. And so knowledge and the good are very, very closely linked in this old theory. You got to actually know what we should do. And so a lot of it has this epistemic dimension of how do you know what we should do? How do you get ethical knowledge, spiritual knowledge that you can then apply? A lot of this stuff, it just doesn't even come up. People just assume that this kind of knowledge isn't possible for people to have, or that it's fake or made up, that you could just figure it out by living life.
They want to act like ideas are these things that either came down from heaven or grew on trees, which is my way of saying transcendent or immanent. And but ultimately it's something that you happen upon, and then it's there, and now it's yours. And people will do this with fields, entire fields of the life of the mind. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's biology. Like they'll talk about it like it's a thing that's just out there and it just exists. And it's like, no, there's a finite number of definite people with proper names, social security numbers, and addresses in specific points in history that have made this thing you're calling a thing in the first place. And it's really just something that exists between these people as they try to figure out the subject matter.
Yeah. So, Marsilius, in talking about all of this in this way, he's way out ahead of a lot of the people who, talk about peoples or talk about society, as a kind of dialectic where people are interfacing together and as a result coming to some kind of knowledge. And he's also, in saying that this can happen politically, giving the state potentially the authority to make a new church. So it opens the door to an enormous pile of things. His famous text, The Defensor Pacis. So we're going to have a ton of fun with that. By the time you get out to Locke, Locke has this idea that, you can question the authority if the authority is tyrannical, and people think that comes from Locke. That's in the Greeks. The idea that tyranny is a deviant monarchy and that you might have to take political action to do something about it, that's in Aristotle. That's extremely old. Aquinas and Diregno, he goes back in the old days, if you had a tyrant, you could overthrow them. Now we don't do that for certain contingent reasons. But back in the old days, yeah, people used to do that. And this is why, and it made sense. So this idea that, Locke invented the idea that you can rebel is just crazy. It just has nothing to do with anything.
I mean,
Locke is in these traditions.
I mean, I think if I remember right, Hobbes even has that on the table, right? Is that right?
Hobbes, if anything, is trying to argue against people who argue too readily that you have the right to rebel. So Hobbes, so Hobbes will say, hey, you all think that you know what's true and what's good. You all claim this. You all have different things that you think are true or good. And the problem is that you all are too sure of yourselves, right? And in practice, look, be reasonable. You're all going to try to impose your interpretation. You're all going to get in each other's way. It's going to lead to a lot of killing. This is, in fact, what's going on now in Britain. You're doing this, and it's just killing a bunch of people. It's not accomplishing anything. So what you should do is you should suspend your belief and give the authority to make the decision over to someone, right? And even if that one will sometimes make decisions you don't agree with, at least then we won't all be getting killed all the time. So it's an argument against what had become very dominant, which were these Protestant theories, which say if you believe that the king is acting against natural law, natural right, then you have the right to rebel, right? If the king is being unnatural in terms of what the king is demanding of you, right, then you have the right to rebel. That idea, which is all over Protestant resistance theory, and which is in many ways a callback to ancient theories about how you can rebel against tyrants. It's just a question of, well, who counts as a tyrant? And what the Protestants do is they try to come up with theological accounts of how to distinguish who's a tyrant and who's not by playing around with natural law theory, right? The church goes, you don't know what natural law is. Only the church knows what it is. And so only the church can say that the king has violated natural law and then excommunicate the king on that basis, right? The Protestants go, who's to say that the church has a monopoly on this? Don't we have the capacity to create communities of knowers who are able to make these judgments? Right? But then you get a bunch of different people claiming to have communities of knowers who reach a bunch of different judgments. So the consensus on the natural established by the church breaks down heavily, right? And as it breaks down heavily, the church is trying to assert a particular interpretation against all of these spiraling alternatives. And this causes the church to get more authoritarian because the church is more desperate to get people back into a lane. So the lane actually gets narrower as the church is trying to prevent people from adopting positions that might lead to schism or deviation. So the church becomes more oppressive as a consequence of this, right? And then at the same time, you get so many different Protestant accounts. And this means that nobody can agree on what they're supposed to be doing. And people are constantly accusing the kings of being unnatural or being tyrants. So Hobbes is trying to clean that stuff up for the purposes of restoring order and preventing people from being killed. And so his way of doing this is to define very, very narrowly when you have a right to rebel, which is when the king is putting your life in danger to the point where you are more likely to survive if you rebel than if you don't. Right?
There we go. Yeah.
This is a very materialist understanding of nature that you get out of that. Right? Is the king putting you in position where you're going to die? Well, if he's not, and you just don't agree, maybe you treat that as an inconvenience.
Right. So
See,
that's
once I get going on this stuff, I can just go and go.
It's just a little taste, guys. So, yeah, no, I want to think a little bit before we kind of turn it over. I'll say some stuff about the way I'm conceiving of my course and the way I'm conceiving of my seminar. And I want to talk a little bit about the way that I'm conceiving of the relationship between the different courses and seminars, because we're trying to make 2025 a very integral year. Not to say that everyone will agree, but instead that we will be enough on the same wavelength so as to even disagree, right? Like genuine disagreement is not possible if you do not understand what the fundamental problems, questions, concepts, thinkers, texts, fields, and operating assumptions are of Theory Underground. And so, that we're doing some base building. But before I get into all of that, I want to ask you, Benjamin, how you're thinking about the relationship between the 12-month course, the 12 lectures on the 12 thinkers, and your seminar. And And we could talk a little bit about how things are spaced out in the month so that people can kind of acclimate into all of this stuff without it being just like an intensive course and then you're done. Instead, it's going to be like it's spread out over the year. And your seminar is 2 weeks apart from your course. So how, as we approach it, it's coming up pretty soon, your first one, how are you thinking about the seminar?
So I'm thinking about the seminar more in terms of what I think in dialogue with what you guys think. So it's more about my own views, and it's about putting these views in conversation with you guys. And in the course of doing that, fleshing out some things. And the recent piece I did on love and libido that we'll talk about later, that piece is an example of this sort of thing, where I'm kind of letting you guys prompt me a little bit to get me to be more specific about some stuff that I have some general thoughts about, but haven't necessarily spelled out. And so in the seminars, I'm going to kind of try to further develop this conceptual scheme. And there's kind of, for me, in terms of my own thinking, I have this kind of three parts of myself that come into play: the Platonic part, the Hobbesian part, and the Marxist part. And I put these things in dialogue with each other a lot. And so as we are going through the different things that different people are doing, I am noticing that different parts of myself are wanting to in some way comment on or interface with or develop things that I'm hearing come up. So far, it's been very much the Platonic part of me that has been leading in that department. But there may be occasions where the other things come into play to varying degrees. When I talk to some other groups or interface with other groups like Platypus, it's always the Hobbes part of me that wants to talk. Because there's always something that I feel like, oh, this part could help. This part could help a bit. So the seminar is going to involve some of that. It's also going to have a certain open-ended quality to it, which means if I'm doing something, and it may be something even, external to this, if I'm doing a journal or an article or a conference or something else that might be able to come in and be interesting, if I think it will interface well, I'll bring it in. The course is going to be less about me and what I think. Although if you ask me questions, I will be honest with you. I won't lie to you or hide what I think from you, right? But the courses are going to be about really trying to enter the point of view of these different traditions, to take each of them seriously on their own terms, and to not treat any one of them as if they don't exist for any good reason, right? Each of these 12, I will kind of put to you, has come into existence for reasons that need to be understood before you decide whether you like or don't like or how much you like these different things. And what a lot of people do is they try to get Manichaean about it. They go, these are the good traditions that are, lead you to being appropriately left-wing or right-wing, right? And these are the bad traditions that lead the other way. And I'm not looking to do that. I want to take all 12 really, really, really seriously. And I want you to, by the time you're done with the course, feel like you can understand why somebody would agree with and hold up as one of the geniuses of history any one of the 12. Any one of the 12. Right? So they're all going to be treated with respect. And that was also a criterion for me. If a theorist is not somebody I could treat with that kind of respect, I didn't want to do them for this course. Because I really want, with each one of the 12, I want to be able to say, this person is really important and really has something to say. And there were functions to this argument. This argument was taken up politically in a way that mattered, that had effect on people's lives. And so if you want to understand what's happened to everybody, you have to grapple with the way in which this was taken up and why it was so compelling to the point at which it would be taken up in the way that it was.
I think that's perfect. Yeah. This for people who've kind of, maybe heard us talk a little bit about this before and we've never really clarified it. This is kind of the place to just really drive it home. The seminar, as it came about somewhat organically, was also inspired by the seminars of Jacques Lacan, Pierre Bourdieu, and Michel Foucault, because each of those three sort of towering French intellectuals at some point was given a sort of platform that was like guaranteed for life, where they could just have their seminar and it was to be public. And so this is where the state kind of signed off on these guys and just was like, here you go. Do with it as you will. And so it's like tenure, but then France is like saying, hey, we know that you Parisians love intellectual stuff. Well, guess what? We're all about liberty and people, freedom of speech and blah, blah. Well, we're going to do public lectures, right? Like the idea was a very radical idea, and it gets Bourdieu all tied up into pretzels. He's always very reflexive about the fact that he's speaking to a mixed audience, right? Like in a way where he's like, I know that what I just said is going to seem like, yeah, duh, to people who've just been studying this for a long time, but also there's a bunch of people here who've never thought about this before. So he's always kind of doing that. And that is what we're doing. But also, I think that the best part is like it's something, and when I say that it came about somewhat organically, the way that Anne and I started the critical media theory seminar was as a course, but because it was monthly, we started to treat it more of as like this thing that wasn't prefigured 6 months in advance. We started being like, let's talk about what we're most interested in that month, so that we're not having to bring something preformed. And hey, I don't want to trash that because that's also important, but it's nice to have the indefinite public seminar with like a committed cohort of people you might do some extra discussion and supervision for their writings with, but like this public aspect. And then, which by the way, and at this point, mine hasn't been public, Mikey's hasn't been public, but for 2025, this stuff's going public. That's a big part of the point with the seminar. And yeah, so courses are finite and prefigured, whereas a seminar is more personal and public and indefinite. Is that a good way of does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think also seminars can kind of contribute toward very long-term projects that don't necessarily have a definitive all the way worked out vision. Like in my case, there's a book that I kind of want to write at some point, that in my head is called Red Marble, which is about putting Marx and Plato together. It's about doing the things that I thought I could do at 18, but was not at all ready to do. In terms of, here are these theorists who come from very different traditions. They actually disagree about a lot, but nonetheless, what happens if you do put them together? I kind of would like to do that. So part of it is thinking about how to take these things. You see this in some of my Substack pieces where I'll talk about some Platonism for a while, but then all of a sudden I want to talk about capitalism in relation to that. And that's this kind of process that I'm trying to be in, of gradually stitching together these different parts of me that so often only one of them can talk at any given time.
Yeah. Yeah. I have noticed that. And I have always kind of just imagined that is a book that you're working on. Like, I didn't have the title in mind. It's a great title. But that is like one of those kind of projects that can be right. The better part of a career, preparing yourself.
Oh no, Dave's lagging hard. Hopefully this is just a momentary.
So what do we want to say about mine? Well, I want Nance, you can say
I thought he was back. I don't think he's back.
Yeah, he is lagging hard.
Lagging hard. Now he is back. Okay, now he is back. Okay.
I see you moving. I see you talking.
You're back. What were you saying? You cut out.
was saying
you were
you
imagining
need a better internet.
Yeah. The last thing we heard was that you have been imagining that this book is a book that Benjamin is working on. And that was all we got.
That's a long time ago. Okay. Holy cow. Yeah, well, Benjamin, I was saying that this is the kind of well, first of all, I imagined that you had something like this that you were working on because it makes sense. I said I didn't have the title in mind. Obviously, it's a fitting title. I'd love to hear more about it. But it's like one of those projects that a whole career can lead up to, like your whole, you know what I mean? So it's like having the seminar as like a sort of when you've got the up-to-itiveness to make it about that, you can, you know, and I love that. And then I sat there and I thought that you were just making a face like, yeah, that's true, Dave. I didn't realize that the connection was broken. And so then I sat there for a moment and then I was like, so Nance, how about you be the segue between Benjamin talking about the courses and seminars and me talking about them. And I was thinking you can get a little meta. You can talk about the last 2 years versus 2025. You can talk about, I don't know, you can ask me questions or Benjamin questions. I kind of wanted to just turn it over to you.
So this is actually, I think, like this is a moment, right? Like being able to bring the breadth of material and the breadth of expertise, I'll even say, together and not do a synthesis, but actually do like these threads remain distinct, but we're weaving them, we're braiding them together into a stronger rope rather than just kind of trying to do some postmodern syncretism or some shit. I think it's a fucking moment in history, in the history of thought, in the history of the human being itself, their self. Fuck you. Just this morning, last night and this morning, I was thinking about anxiety and subjectivity and identity and being in the world, right? And I'm coming from Heidegger and Kierkegaard and Bergson. Like that's my stomping ground or whatever. And I'm posing direct questions to Benjamin, essentially, because Benjamin has, I think really I'm posing my question to the Plato that lives in Benjamin's head. And the Plato that lives in Benjamin's head is also in dialogue with Marx and also in dialogue with Hobbes and Rousseau, and all these other thinkers. So it's a very robust Plato. I have a lot of faith in this Plato. So I feel like posing these questions will be very fruitful, and being able to do that in the context of a productive community, a community of, maybe we're not yet a community of knowers, but we are definitely a community of thinkers, of wonderers, of questioners, of wanting to be knowers. Being able to do that, I think it's spectacular. I think those of you who have the opportunity to subscribe at any tier at Theory Underground, you're getting in on something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So get in the boat. We're gonna cross the fucking what's the river? Starts with
Rubicon.
the T. Yeah, it starts with an R. The Rubicon. We're crossing the Rubicon. We're going boldly into the future. But like being able to do that, being able to have like what I call like a more post-structural, even postmodern, continental, French thinker, although there's German thinkers as well. But having like Dave having a theory of like the moment and like what is the moment? Who are we? What are we? What are we in? And being able to bring that into dialogue with Benjamin's like historical scope. Like you're going all the way back to the beginning of these questions of politics to like government and the state as a structure that emerges in response to the necessity of humans, citizens, coping with the real, coping with their reality. Like, that is what politics is. And you've said it before. I think it's a human response to an inhuman, I don't know. And as it's a human response, it's imperfect and there's going to be failures. But going to the origins of that and then coming through it, understanding the stages, the phases, the context, the implications, the repercussions, like all this stuff. Like that to me, I think is special. So often we find ourselves specializing. Like, oh, I'm a French guy. I really like French theory, so I'm just going to read nothing but French theory. And that's an approach of, I think, necessity for a lot of people. There's just not time to read everything. There's not time to become the expert in everything. But it remains true that we need a broad approach. We need to be generalists. We need to be the polymath. We need to be well-rounded. We can't just be the postmodern, tailorized, hyper-specialized experts in one discrete thing. And here I've been talking Dave and Benjamin, but we're also bringing in Mikey, and Mikey is doing this other thing with like the medium and the fault line, and he's also post-structuralist, postmodern, and once again Nina is connected to history in a different way from Benjamin. And I think there's a lot of crosstalk between, I think you are doing man throughout the ages and Nina may be doing the world throughout the ages, maybe. But there's all these tensions and there's all these things that they might even be contradictions, and other people might view them as irreconcilable. Other people might view them as incompatible. Other people might view them as irrelevant. They might say, like in the past, I might have been want to say like, oh, well, I really like math and science. And I do, in fact, care a little bit less about continental philosophy. So I'm just going to read about math and I'm just going to read about science. And I'm not going to spend my time on the humanities. Bringing them together at Theory Underground and allowing them to converse and allowing the individual threads cross and overlap as we braid a nice thick rope is amazing. And it might be a rope that's robust enough to bear our weight as we climb boldly into the future. Or maybe it's just the dance party at the end of the world.
We could be like a tugboat. And that's the rope we need to pull the aircraft
rest
carrier
of everybody up
through the bay.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. I don't know. The metaphors aren't really coming as sharp as they might otherwise be coming today. But no, I think you guys are lucky. You, audience, I'm talking to you right now, watching in the future and listening right now, listening in the future. You guys are lucky. You guys are uniquely situated to kind of observe us, right? Develop from a community of thinkers, a community of wanderers, a community of people who want to be knowers into, hopefully, barring, things outside of our control, into a community of knowers, into an actual group that might be able to have something to say about the moment, about the situation. Another thing for me, it's easy to bracket out politics entirely because there's nothing there. We're frozen. It's static. There's nothing we can do. But Benjamin comes along and poses the challenge, who says, nevertheless, we must act. And in order to act, we must know, we must understand, we must think before we can act. But like you take away that cope. Like that was a cope of mine for so long, to just say, fuck it, I'm black-pilled, politics aren't real. And you come along and you pose these challenges, and they're necessary challenges if we hope for anything else. Like if any of us hope for a future that doesn't look like sitting back, masturbating, consuming, arguing, being hateful, being disgusting beings who do nothing but just consume and vomit, then we have to act. We don't have the choice. So also sunshine and rainbows and stuff too. And there's and allowing enough space, because the experience of like organizing that Dave brings, having gone through multiple iterations of projects, there's enough space for, first of all, the inevitable failures that'll come up, but also there's enough space for these individual threads to have enough room to breathe. We're not going to overload you. In the past at Theory Underground, I think it probably might have been overwhelming for people when it was just, we're going hard all day, every day. Not everybody has access to that much time or that much energy to be able to keep up all that time. Not everybody wants to. We have to allow people to go at their own pace as well. So hopefully having a different structure will provide more opportunities for the people to engage without feeling overwhelmed, and also to not feel like you're missing out, because we're still here on the internet. There's still this immediacy. There's still, even though we try to deconstruct it and we're aware of it and we try to make you, audience, aware of it, it still is this implicit message of here's this. You get the notifications. You see the thing. You see it's live streaming. You see it's a 6-hour live streaming, and you're like, well, shit, I don't have 6 hours. I'm not even going to watch the whole thing. Like, we try to design everything in a consumable, not consumable, in a accessible form for the students and fellow travelers and interlocutors and interlopers and all these things. So I'm fucking excited. It's also a big task. Schedules are scary. But I have faith. Because rather than just being like some like faceless institutional, trust me, bro, it's going to work. Like, it's tied to concrete individuals. It's tied to Benjamin. It's tied to Dave. It's tied to Ann. It's tied to Mikey. Like, oh, we can pull this shit together. We can make this shit happen. It's not the university telling me that I have to live up to these expectations. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, we're actually making the thing.
Yes.
And by the way, we are at a point now where there is a schedule for the course that I'm going to be teaching. So the thing to do if you want to take it is to start in on the Plato. January is Plato month, right? So we're going to get to a point in January where I'm going to give this lecture followed by a discussion, 1 hour lecture, 1 hour discussion on Plato. That is going to be January 25th. And that's going to happen at 11 o'clock Mountain, 1 o'clock Eastern. And if you want to be ready for that, well, you want to start in on at least the Republic, right? If you want to write a paper, do more than that. If you are loving it as you're doing it, I've got a list of stuff that will be released that you could explore. But the main thing to start in with, if you just want to get going, is Plato's Republic. And my favorite translation of that, if you're trying to pick a version and you don't know which version, is the Gruba and Reeve, which is in the Hackett Complete Works, published in 1997. So if you want to get going right away with this, we are, a couple of days away from January, and my operating premise is that from January 1st on, you can be reading the Republic a little bit at a time over the course of the month. So you'll have some notion by the time that I give the lecture of what we're talking about. You don't just come to it blind. And if you're hardcore and you're ready to write a paper, you should be able to get access to that list, which will give you other stuff to play with. So not only can you read the Republic, but if you have the energy and the time, you can also look at some of this other stuff related to Plato or related to Plato's work that will give you some sense of the different interpretations that are current or popular, not to instruct you on which one you should have, but to give you a sense of some of the things that come up, right? But the way it's structured, if you just have time to read the Republic, that's fine. If you've got time to read the Republic and a little bit more, that's great. And if you have time to read a considerable amount of stuff and write me a great 2,000-word essay that I can then give very detailed feedback on, that would be amazing. I'd love to do that for you.
And he's not going to just say, "Oh, that's a great idea. Wow, that's genius." He's also going to give some real feedback.
Yeah, I'm going to hold it to a real standard. So you can actually get better.
And
right? Because you can watch anybody give lectures, on the internet, but to actually get held to a standard so that you improve is a very different thing. Personal standard based on engaging with actually what you as an individual are producing, right? Not just me making general comments about this group of people or that organization or that theorist and the people who follow them. No. Your work. Full comments, whole margins. I'm going to fill up on Word, on Google Docs, whatever it is. The whole fucking side of it. Continuously.
And it's world-class comments, people. This is not stuff that's just appearing.
I won an award for doing this shit at Cambridge.
Yeah.
At Queen's College, I won the prize for outstanding contribution to college education. There was a whole room, like those long tables that you see in Harry Potter, of all the supervisors at Queen's. They were all there, and I got the prize for the year, right? I was a finalist, university-wide best supervisor in the humanities at Cambridge. University-wide. The humanities at Cambridge. All colleges. All disciplines in the humanities. I got to like the top 3 my final year. As a PhD student, not doing this professionally, just figuring it out as I went along. I'm quite good at this specific thing. I'm just saying. This specific thing, I'm very good at.
We're not worthy.
Yeah.
There are lots of things I'm bad at.
Dude, seriously, it's amazing.
But this specific thing, I am very good at it.
That's fucking amazing to be able to have the opportunity. Me, a fucking a shitty punk rock dickhead loser, to have the opportunity to be able to get that kind of feedback on anything I do. That's amazing. I think that in itself is historical. Fuck everything else. That in itself, I think, is historical. The fact that we're like forcing this type of communication, this type of interpersonal contact. We're fucking forcing it. The world is not designed to do this. The fucking colleges you're going to go to, the institutions, don't let this shit happen. No. Real fucking people who have real fucking ideas and who are probably wrong about most of it, nevertheless, have an opportunity to have considered, deliberate, worthwhile fucking constructive feedback. That's amazing. It really is.
And you don't have to pay the tuition for the whole year and make this your entire life and commit to somehow finding a way to turn it into a job. You don't have to approach it that way.
Right. You don't have to sell your soul, sell an arm and a leg. This is attainable for real people.
It's gonna.
Yeah, I spent. I went $60,000 into debt while working multiple jobs through college. Like I was working multiple jobs and going 60 grand. Now I probably could have finished it off at 40K if I didn't do the master's. Of course, the master's would have been a lot more if I'd gone elsewhere, or it would have been a fellowship and it would have all been paid. But there were a bunch of contingencies and reasons why it just worked out to do it the way that I did it. And I have no regrets, but at the same time, my goal is to build something that would have made it so that I wouldn't have had to do that and could have just worked at Amazon and just, I mean, you're paying as much as you would for a jiu-jitsu subscription. Like if you were at a jiu-jitsu gym, you're paying that much, which by the way, working class people can generally afford something like that as long as they're not in a super shitty situation, which, if you're in that super shitty situation, maybe just focus on getting out of it. That's The real meaning of self-care is get out of the job that makes it so you can't listen to books. Get out of the job that makes it so you can't afford your apartment. Get out of the job that makes it so you can't go to weddings. There are abusive, toxic jobs, and then there are less bad jobs. And my entire experience with jobs has always just been discovering like the affordances, the accidental affordances of jobs. And Amazon's one of the best ones. And so like I am like always thinking like, yeah, no, if I was working at Amazon right now, how would this course load affect me? Like to what degree would I be able to engage? Would I be able to do the monthly supervisions with Benjamin? Maybe. But I know for a fact I'd be able to at least follow the lectures. And thinking about doing the supervisions and the fact that that's real and getting to see the turn and seeing the feedback on the turn, that would itself facilitate a lot, right? There's a kind of like when Sean Middlestat was on the turn, it's like if I'm working in the warehouse and I'm listening to that, well, then I can imagine what it would be like if I rode a baby for a year and then it was up on the turn. Like I can imagine it, and then I can imagine what kind of feedback I'd get, and then that's actually going to impact and accelerate my development when it comes to the kinds of notes that I'm writing on these bathroom breaks that I'm taking at Amazon. So, Nance said that you guys are lucky. And I hope so. The fact is the quality of the free content is going to go up, and there's going to be more of it. But also, it'll hopefully be easier to know what's essential versus what's kind of just like a fun conversation that we had, right? Like why left and what's right and why us. There might be episodes we refer to, and then you can go check it out, but we'll never assume that you watched or heard all of the episodes of any one of those podcasts. We'll never assume that you watched all of an M-Stew. We'll never assume that you're up to date on all the conversations that took place across the M-Stew. That's not important. Like we can tell you something that happened, and then you can always go look it up for yourself if you want to. But the main point is with 2025, the thing I wanted to zone in on here is the people feeling overwhelmed, not having a sort of like not being able to find the directionality that is inherent to the process, or burning out in the attempt to sort of catch up. And I hate that, and I don't want that, because we really should assume an audience of people who are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited for this thing, and they're willing to give it a month to a year of their life, right? They're willing to give it a month to a year of their life. Like that's the kind of person I want to assume. I'm not going to assume someone who's been hanging on for 2 years, trying to keep up, overwhelmed. No, I want to work with that person. I want to help that person. But by assuming the person who is fresh and up to it for a month to a year, by assuming that person and making sure that they have a great experience, well, that person who's trying to catch up, they're going to find a way to catch up in a sort of sense. Of course, we put quotation marks around catching up. But basically, I want you guys to say stuff. I know you're both excited to say something, so I'll let you guys go in a sec. But what I want to come back to is how my course and seminar workload for 2025 is structured to short circuit what would otherwise be an intimidating amount of catch-up work. So, but what do you guys want to say about all that so far?
I was actually going to ask you to talk about the TU-based concepts, because I'm really excited for this, because I wasn't along for all of it, and I want to get kind of some of this core, where are we coming from stuff myself, so that I can do a better job of integrating everything together.
Yeah, I think that's
yeah. How about you, Nance?
The notion of catching up. I don't even know what that means or what that would mean, but it is true that there is a base level of we need a shared ground. We need a mutually agreed upon set of references that are intelligible, that we're all conversant in. We need shared reference. So if we take catching up to mean getting to that level, getting conversant, getting proficient, getting comfortable and familiar with the base questions, the base problems, assumptions. Like, yeah, I think that's a version of catching up that would be helpful. That is helpful for us to kind of think about as we are designing or trying to imagine the future. So I think that's it. Like, if we can just expound upon that base, I think that's good.
I'm starting a poll for the chat. Did you smash like already? Yes. No, I forgot. Let me get on it now. And no way, Jose. I'll never do it. Nah, nah, nah. There we go. And so you can all engage with that poll. We're very curious to know the results of it. And with that said, I'll just say a few things about this. So kind of the initial plan, the previous episode would have ended something like 18 minutes ago, and then we would have started this other episode of Why Us. But I want this to instead just be like a special, longer episode of Why Left that might get cross-posted with Why Us, because it's it's 100% in both wheelhouses. And I think that this crossbreeding of the episodes instead of two distinct ones makes a lot more sense right now. So, and this one will get published out of order on the podcast app. This will get published out of order ahead of some of the other episodes that are currently scheduled, because 2025 is so soon upon us. And so with that said, so what happened at Theory Underground in the last 2 years? And do you really need to catch up on all of it or any of it? What is the wavelength? Is it worth getting on in the first place? There's a certain kind of person who's just like, yes, I like what you guys are doing. I don't really understand everything, but I'm here for it. And so I'm going to just nose to the grindstone and just binge. And I love that person, that kind of person, but also that kind of person is not usually a woman. That kind of person's usually a guy who's between the ages 27 and 42, which is most of the demographics here. And that's okay, but I've meant that to be a phase of Theory Underground because we were just going hard and we just wanted to do what we needed to do. But what we're entering is this new era, and bringing around the seminar was a part of the new era, which was, hey, we'll have stuff, weekly stuff, monthly stuff that you can kind of rely on, that you can attend, where you don't have to have done a reading to get something out of it. The seminar is a bit more like a sermon as opposed to a lecture, right? Because a lecture is a lot more like there are learning outcomes to this lecture, and they are a part of a course. Whereas the seminar is like you're following in the wake of some thinker's research, and they're kind of sharing results, and they're also working through things right in front of you sometimes, right? And so Jaspers talks about this in The Idea of the University. He talks about whether it's a super dry and boring lecturer or a super dynamic and charismatic lecturer, there's an inherent value for every student to get to spend time with different varieties of thinkers engaged in ongoing research, basically bringing you in on whatever it is that they're doing. And so, but I use the word sermon there just because it's also, as Benjamin and Mikey have both pointed out with their own seminars, it's a bit more collaborative than a regular lecture in the sense that, like, I'm getting to know you guys over time, and so there's a little bit of a co-creative aspect to it. Now, I mean, that's true with lectures as well. Attentive, note-taking students make the lecture, in a sort of sense, because it's like, this is serious, like it puts like that good pressure on the speaker. But with all that said, what you've missed, if we wanted to use those terms, I don't want to, because I don't want to lean into the FOMO, the fear of missing out, but I'm going to give you a quick run through of some of the idea of the university course, the professional managerial class consciousness and ideology course, Slavoj Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do course, Martin Heidegger's Being in Time course, Emmanuel Levinas's Totality and Infinity course. Each of those books, by the way, Being in Time and Totality and Infinity, you could spend your entire life studying it. CMT, Critical Media Theory, I taught that with Anne. Critical Doxology and Time Energy, I taught that with Anne. And those were the ones that became seminars. Then there was the Leon Brenner course, the Clinical Structures of Psychoanalysis. Actually, Cadell Last of Philosophy Portal was our first guest lecturer. He taught Alenka Zupancic's What is Sex? Todd McGowan taught Seminar 11, and Chris Catrone taught Introduction to Marxism. That was the most recent on his part. And then, of course, Mikey's Intro to Land and Intro to Žižek, which, I mean, Intro to Land versus Intro to Žižek, that is sort of the foundational two courses for entering into the fault line theory, trying to understand the material and ideological conditions of the interests and algorithms in the internet theory scene being what they are, right? Being what they are. And so, you know, he's not just specializing in French fried German philosophy. He's been doing philosophy just generally for a long time, but he got more into the French fried German philosophy recently. In the last 7 years, especially, that's kind of his super emphasis has been on it. And he's got this sort of laser scholarly thing that he brings to the fault line theory. And as Nance was laying it out, there's the fault line theory, there's the history of philosophy from Plato through Marx. Then there's this sort of the history of philosophy, nature. How do humans interface with nature, and how do they conceptualize it? And how does the left kind of just lose the plot that there are actual natural limits and things like that? All of that. How does that all fit together? Well, it's all part of what I can't do myself. And if I could do it myself, I would. And I wouldn't have any of these guys around trying to teach me. But I wrote up a 42-page document before I started Theory Underground, and it had all the courses that I wish I could take, all the courses that I wish were actually at some kind of a teaching institution that was neither left nor right, but was for people who were burnt out on both. A place for people who prioritize understanding over what's the word? I almost want to say the word Protestant. That's not the word. It's a political sort of pundit position. Yeah, a partisan position. That's what I meant to say. Partisan. Okay. So they're setting Mikey and Benjamin and Nina up to teach these specific things in 2025 is meant to sort of help me in my development. So this is why I was saying, Nance is saying you're all lucky. I just feel like I'm the luckiest person in the whole world. I genuinely am the most grateful person ever when I'm thinking about the fact that I get to sort of absorb this stuff from you all. And then by slipstreaming you guys, I'll get to kind of make decisions about my time and energy, about what to dive into and when. Well, that's what I aim to do for you all with the courses that I just outlined. The Idea of the University, the PMC course, the For They Know What They Do course, the Being in Time course, the Totality and Infinity course, the Critical Media Theory course, and the CDT, Critical Doxology and Time Energy courses. Brenner, McGowan, Catrone, Last, and Mikey's courses, I'll reference them, but I'm not going to do the same kind of survey because in a lot of cases, those courses they're like a extra deep dive, or like an intro into something that is important to have an intro to. But what I want to focus on for my 12 lectures are the fundamental problems, questions, concepts, and thinkers and texts of Theory Underground. And so there's several ways of doing that. I could do 12 concepts. I could do 12 problems. I could do an overview of those courses that I just listed, an overview on this course, an overview on that course, or I could tease out essential themes from those different courses, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I'm going to be using my discernment and inspiration, as well as, and when I say inspiration, I mean like what I feel alive doing, right? In as opposed to Benjamin's, you won't have to do much of any serious reading before these, because the idea is if you want to, the course exists, you can dive into it. And so people who are like, oh, I want to take that course, Dave, I became a subscriber, give me access to that course, I'm discouraging that. Of course, I can do exceptions to the rule or whatever, but I'm just generally saying, don't worry about the past catalog until I've done this sort of survey intro to why it matters in the first place, so you can at least decide if you're even into it. But as far as the concepts go, I by the way, I want to acknowledge the fact that in the live chat for the last 2 weeks, we've received several people asking, hey, what are the main questions, concepts, problems at TU? And the reason that that became a thing is because I started referencing it over the last 2 weeks. I've started saying things like, don't start giving us unsolicited advice if you don't know what our fundamental problems, questions, and concepts are, because we're not on the same page. And so your advice is just not gonna meet the mark. But we're talking about getting you on the same page enough so that we can have real disagreements. And so with that said, well, what are the five main? And I want this to be an ongoing sort of debate that I'm having with myself. And I want to, at the same time, be hearing other people's thoughts on it. Time energy is obviously number one. It is just number one in a sort of sense, except that the reason time energy comes around as the fundamental concept is because the good life is the fundamental question. And it's a fundamental question because of a fundamental problem. And that fundamental problem is that this ain't it. This ain't it. We know that this ain't it, because people not having time energy for their children or their friends or their families or their talents, or to tutor one another, or to build institutions that aren't profit driven, like all of these things, that's a problem. It's a serious problem, meaning that instead of soil being cultivated, we've been reduced to dirt. Instead of being raised to something higher than our worm reptile selves, we are in the mud, right? And I'm a muddy little boy trying to wash myself off on the riverbank. And there's a method to the madness for how to wash yourself off in a sort of sense. You can't just say, oh, let's go back before modernity. Let's go back to an ancient. They saw how it is. They had a much better picture of how it is. Let's just we'll stay with them. We'll just be classicists for the rest of our days. Of course not, because we still live in capitalism. So you're still going to need Marx. Okay, but do you really need Marshall McLuhan or Martin Heidegger? Do you really need Emmanuel Levinas or Jacques Lacan? Do you really need Bourdieu or Baudrillard? I mean, come on, do you? This is a real question. What I aim to show you is what I would have aimed to show myself back in 2020 when I was burning out. If I had come across this podcast and I was hearing this episode, I'd be paying attention. I'd be like, okay, so what are the concepts? So it's not just time energy. There are concepts that get us to why we don't have it. And of course, with Marx, that's surplus value and socially necessary labor time and labor power, right? Teasing out the difference between those things and time energy is an essential task. Do you have to read 3 volumes of Das Kapital to get the basics of that? I think that you at least need to know about this one big debate between the labor theory of value and the value form debate itself. Right? This thing going on between Mihail Heinrich and Mosley, RIP. I think he just passed away this year. Or Karatani, right? Like because Karatani is also based in value form pilled. It's not my goal to tell you have to be based and value form pilled to roll with TU. I want you to understand why we want Marx to be based in value form pilled if he's not. There's because this interpretive argument in the literature about what he's doing, is it just Petit Ricardo and the labor theory of value, Or is he doing an imminent critique of value itself, right? And it says, and we could also bring in some Pistone here. Well, you don't have to read Time, Labor, and Social Domination and Introduction to the 3 volumes of Marx's Capital. And no, I'll just do a lecture on it. All right, I'll just do that. I'll do it. Time energy is a relational concept, meaning we can't understand it outside of the relation to what Das Kapital does with surplus value, social necessary labor, time, and labor power, or value more generally. Well, the same thing is true with being in the world, Dasein, the existentialia, right? Which in a more Kantian register would be the transcendental conditions of subjectivity. But for Heidegger, it's going to be more, I don't want to use the word particular because it applies to all humans everywhere. But the conditions of possibility for worldhood, not the subject to be a subject, but the conditions of possibility for the kind of worldhood that the Greeks had, right? We can go back to the Greeks and read the Greeks, and we might be able to deduce some things and read some history about it and get somewhere. But also to deconstruct the liberal modern in us so we can understand humans have tended to have a thing called worldhood. And this subject-object divide that is so normalized for all of us is something that's specifically modern. It's got a specific historical emergence. And I want to be able to show everybody that even if Adorno is correct on everything he has to say about the ontological difference, that doesn't change a damn thing for what I draw from being in time. And that's what I would also say about Das Kapital. If the tendency for the rate of profit to fall and the labor theory of value are what Marx is doing, and he's doing it because he cares about the dictatorship of the proletariat, and it turns out the dictatorship of the proletariat is a means towards an end that is not a preferable end, and it's not even a preferable or plausible means, that doesn't change the fact that Das Kapital is the place that we have to go to talk about value, right? So we still have to go there. Do you have to read it all? No, you don't. Maybe someday. But also, I want you to be able to make an informed decision. And so I'll be focusing on specific concepts that come out of these texts that are so important for me. And then I kind of want to treat as like they're my special texts. They don't have to be yours. But I do want you to understand what we mean by Befindlichkeit so that you can understand what we mean by gerrymandering Befindlichkeit, so you can understand how gerrymandering Befindlichkeit relates to the medium, relates to the PMC, relates to the duopoly, relates to the stultification of time energy, relates to ultimately all of these concepts under the header of the PCFM, or the post-class fractured mass, which is, once again, a part of the problem, a part of the question, and it's one of our fundamental concepts. Other fundamental concepts are organizational ones like the turn and tribunal zero and contradiction, but also socioanalysis, which I do get from Bourdieu, but I think it's a relational concept, and so we have to understand it in reference to social engineering, not in the sort of pickup artist sense. In reference to social engineering, like Auguste Comte, and think Century of Self, with Adam Curtis. So social engineering and psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis, as you learned with Adam Curtis in the Century of Self, through Bernays gets lifted and brought into public relations and advertising and marketing and propaganda, right? And then Joseph Goebbels picks it up and runs with it and kind of perfects it. And now it's just common sense. Socioanalysis is a combat sport for defending yourself from that. That's ultimately what it is. It's a combat sport for making it so that all of the time and energy you spend thinking about serious questions are not mere echoes of the social engineering that has been being done on us our entire lives in split competing institutions that form the institutional matrix that is the background conditions of intelligibility for all of us in this thing that we call a world. So there's a lot of other concepts, there's a lot of other thinkers, there's a lot of other courses, there's a lot of other texts that I have here on the list. I want to get into legitimacy, but this is ultimately something like how we've been thinking about legitimacy can't be thought without reference to Benjamin's book now, which we all have to read and reread. So those lectures would be later. not the first priority, right? First priority for 2025, which this I'll be doing this one in a like a week. Is that right? Yeah, I'll be doing this, I think, in a week. It's going to be on the idea of university and the PMC, but not the PMC as a class, but specifically as a historic function and role in the maintenance of the relations of production that was deliberate, that was conscious, and that was a reaction against working class organizing from the 19th century. But specifically that in juxtaposition to the noble idea of the university, as articulated by Karl Jaspers after the fall of Nazi Germany, when he wrote The Idea of University and dedicated it to the president of a university, saying, hey, you can take the totalitarianism out of the university, but don't forget about business, my brother. And then he goes, and check this out. And then he lays out what the ideal is. And I think it's this idea that we should never do critique without a fleshing out of the ideal. That's part of the TU brand. We don't fucking come along and go, oh, neoliberal university. As soon as you do that, you're acting like the university before it was just like this perfect thing. No, it's a great idea. There's a wonderful idea there. What is that idea? And then what are the tendencies inherent to the relationships within that institution that make it so that there's a sort of inertia that undermines the realization of that ideal? And then, of course, we can bring in questions about whether that ideal is ultimately just being used as a sort of ideological way of naturalizing, or a bunch of contingent institutions that ultimately just serve power in some specific way. Those are questions that are on the table. But we can't even ask those questions until we've tarried with Jaspers. And so I want to give you the quick and dirty on Jaspers and the PMC. And that'll be round one. Here you go, guys.
Yeah, don't sleep on Dave. People think, oh, Dave just organizes. Nuh-uh. Don't sleep on Dave. Dave is thinking some really cool shit. Big part of why I'm here is that Dave can think.
Thanks, Benjamin. It's very kind of you. There's a bunch of other stuff that I'd like to say, but I'm going to just go ahead and curb or bookmark the course stuff. So basically, 2025, 12 lectures to give you this sort of overview of the courses that you did not do, which also means I get to redo my Being in Time in one lecture, which you won't find that on the internet. You're not going to, except for the one time that I did it already with Anne. Which did not achieve what I wanted it to, even though I think it was a good attempt. I plan on doing something much better in 2025. But my seminar is going to be completely different. It's going to be very different from what's going on with the course. And the special thing about the seminar is the sort of creative freedom that I have. And I basically want to focus on engaging with Mikey and Benjamin's courses and seminars, and Nina. But especially just like this sort of meta conversation. And I'm going to be writing monthly papers to undergo supervision with Benjamin. You better bet I will. And of course, I'll want to draw on all of that stuff, like Plato's Republic, right? The Leviathan, etc. I'll want to draw on that stuff in my seminars, but my seminar is ultimately trying to help me write a book. And so, it's setting me up to write a very important book, one that for now, I'll just say it's all the stuff that we're doing, theorizing the underground, but also theorizing, like, what can a person like me actually do? Not thinking super, super short term, go throw a brick or go to a protest or vote, and not thinking super long term, like, intergenerational, hundreds of years of struggle. but like within a real lifespan. Like that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah. So very excited about that, guys.
Yeah, this is something we all got in common, which is that we want to write a book, right? And if we have written a book, we want to write another better book. Ultimately, this is about making real theory that can actually help people think. But it's also about helping you guys, if you're serious about it, if you have the drive, if you have the conditions that allow you to pursue it, of getting to a stage where you could potentially do this too. You want to write a book? You want it to be good? Well, let's see if you can do it. I like to leave these hanging questions sometimes, Dave, let's see if you can do it.
Hit us with your best shot.
Yeah.
Caravaggio
I love it when
said,
people
if you
hit you
boys
with their best shot.
Yeah.
Oh no, Dave froze again. I think he was about to read Caravaggio's chat message, and the initial response to that is, thanks for the unsolicited advice, Caravaggio. I know I've seen your name in chat enough to know that you know how much we love unsolicited advice. But the genuine response to that is, yeah, there are things in the works. And there are already people plugging away at that task as we speak. So keep your eyes open and be excited for what is coming.
What is the question he asked me in chat?
Have you boys ever considered a clip channel? Maybe it's something that can be outsourced to help people get familiar with the basics. And it's a good question. But it is, yes, it has been considered, and it is in the works.
Dave does post some shorts sometimes.
Yes.
Occasionally.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much work to do. There's so many things to be done, and it really is. It takes a village to raise a baby, and in this case, it takes a village to let people know what's going on regularly and consistently.
Yeah.
Yeah. The point about the podcasts is really important. You don't have to watch all of the podcasts. The courses will never be premised on watching all of the podcasts. The podcasts bring people in. They help explain what we're doing, why it matters, so that you can get more involved with the more serious high-level theory, which occurs for those who are part of TU.
Am I back? Is this working now?
Yes.
Yes.
That was so savage. It actually kicked me from the call that time. I didn't just freeze. I had to
I fully
rejoin,
kicked you?
so.
Wow.
Yeah, dude.
Oof.
Yeah, that's not normal. Hobdabob says, in terms of rendering the pertinent core values of TU theory within the context of an audience struggling with time energy, it would be useful to me and possibly others for you to create some videos. And so videos for dummies is what, and I agree. And there was a time when I was kind of doing that, but also there's a time in one's life to focus on outreach and influence. And there's a time in one's life to focus on figuring things out for oneself. You're here, you're all here at the point where I'm figuring things out with other people. Not for myself, but with other people. We're figuring things out. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And so the reason I'm saying it all this way is just like, it really is like two different things. Writing for oneself to figure something out, or writing to be understood by a small handful of other people. Like, so we're trying to figure it out together. And this sort of like, oh, I've got to figure it out, so now I'm going to do this like outreach thing. It's like, no, I've given myself permission to write that book a lot later. Yeah.
Yeah. If, 80 of you were doing supervisions with me, that would be incredible. I would be, wow, that's a fantastic number of people. And also, I don't have much more time energy to do very many more than that in a given month, right? Like, this is not about, oh, let's go viral. It's not about that. Really radically not about that. It's also not about let's make everybody have our values or view everything the way that we view it. Here's an invitation to think. If you take the invitation, then you sign up for TU, and then you think with us. And then over time, we all think together and we read each other's stuff. We dialogue with each other. We have dialectic, right? And then we develop and we get better, and our shared understanding gets better. And we help you, and you could develop to a point where you could help us too. And we can grow in our understanding. And then as stuff happens, as these events in the news happen, we'll be able to interpret it from within the paradigm of what we're doing instead of being towed around by all the stupid crap that otherwise tows everybody around all the time. So if you want to be free from the stupid crap and you want to be able to think about the things that are happening, then, if you can, come and get serious with us and let's be serious together. Let's be intense and do something intense and just see where it leads. But, that's not going to be for everybody. The people who need the TU Concepts for Dummies are not going to come and think with us. They are looking for a worldview in many cases. That's not what we're doing. We're not giving people a worldview and telling them what to think.
Hob says, I didn't mean to assume it was, but if we're going to get told off because we're not yet well read enough, how can we meaningfully contribute?
Well, the meaningful contributing goes on in the seminars and in the courses, right? When we're doing the podcast is just about bringing people in. The podcast is not, let's have a dialogue. Really, if you have a question that clarifies what's going on in the podcast, the clarifying questions that they talk about, right? Something that helps us to get at what we're trying to say, that's really where we're at in terms of the podcast. But if you want to get involved, with the theory, really get involved with the theory, then you have to be part of the community. You have to be part of the community of knowers, which requires a commitment to that community, right?
Isn't it interesting that there are a lot of ostensibly left, philosophical and theory spaces online that don't have that approach, that do kind of maintain this mirage of mutual contribution on the part of the people doing the work and on the part of the audience as well. And look, I've been part of those groups as well, where I think my comment on a video or my I'm contributing to what's going on. I don't know. And it's not to sit back and do this thing. And I don't think anybody was being told off for not being well read enough. I think it's just trying to explicate the method. We are not here having a conversation with everyone watching right now or listening right now. We are having a conversation among and amidst and betwixt ourselves, and you guys are privy to that. And if you want to be in the conversation, the way to do that is through the front door, which is the seminars, the lectures, the courses, becoming the subscriber. I do think it is interesting that there is that kind of image of we're having a conversation.
Well, that's the parasocial dynamic, which is the usual dominant thing. Usually people are trying to grow the number of people who watch their stuff so that they can use the streaming numbers as the basis, right? Or their Patreon as the basis. So they're trying to engage with their people watching their stream, or the people who who pay their Patreon, so that those people will stick around. And so it becomes desperately trying to appease the people who are watching. And those people are looking for some kind of parasocial dynamic. They're not looking to, which is not to accuse anybody in the chat, right? It's
No,
just
no,
to
no.
clarify
No.
models and what we're trying to do. So that's why a lot of the time, the way that we interact with chat will be different from the way maybe other people would interact with their chats. And I do think that we should try to do it in a way which maybe reproaches less. I think sometimes Dave reproaches a little bit. And that was your New Year's
Hey,
resolution about being
Benjamin.
nicer to chat, right?
Okay. There we
Was
go.
to not reproach them.
Yeah, I thought you were setting it up like it was your idea. No, I told
No.
you that's my resolution.
Of course, you said that at the top when I first came on. So I'm just operating within the framework that you already laid out. But I think it's a fair point. We're not trying to tell people off. We're trying to help people figure out how to contribute. If you're watching and you're going, I want to be part of this, I want to contribute, we're trying to help you figure out how you can do that. The alternative to that is to just ignore stuff that doesn't serve our purpose, which we could do, and that would probably be my impulse. My impulse would just be to ignore stuff that doesn't serve our purpose and to not give people a hard time about it, but to just not engage with it. But one of the things that is interesting about the way Dave and Nance approach the chat is that they try to guide people toward how could they interact, because Dave and Nance realize people who are trying to interact, they want to take it up a little. There is something about the attempt that indicates perhaps a willingness to take it further, maybe, or maybe you guys are just too suffering from recognition lack and therefore focusing too much on what other people think. I don't know.
Well, look, I think that's it. I think the people in the chat are suffering from that lack of recognition. Like in order to communicate, you have to first.
We all are.
Yeah,
we all are.
Like like that's true, and that's operant as well. But it is like, there is a pathway to being able to have this conversation, but be aware of the fact that in a live chat or in a comment section, you are not being heard. You are not contributing.
Misrecognition is kind of cooked into it.
100%.
Yeah. And I do think that there's often this kind of thing can happen where you can get into a kind of recognition game where the streamer is feeling their recognition undermined by what's going on in the chat, and the chat is trying to get recognition by provoking the streamer. And this can take the whole thing very far away from where it's meant to be. And so there is a need to kind of guard against that. And there are two ways of guarding against it. One is to ignore the chat, and the other is to try to interact with the chat in a way which prevents it from becoming that. Again, not to accuse anybody of having done that. I'm just thinking about the theory of chats right now. I'm not going after anybody.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been kind of in the last month, Nance and I, doing more than normal and trying more things than usual. And part of the reason is because Nance started streaming, and now that he's done it on his own, he knows a little bit more about the dynamic, which you can only really get once you've done it. I do encourage everyone to give it a try at some point. It's not a normal experience. It's not like driving a car. Like when you get in a car, you got to learn a few things, but for the most part, it's pretty intuitive. There's nothing intuitive about the relationship between you and the chat versus the broader audience. There's nothing intuitive or natural at all. It is its own thing. And so normally what happens is you get people who are very parasocial, and I don't like that word for a whole bunch of reasons, but I'll use it because I do tend to use it in this case, which is just to be like, I love you guys, and you guys are all intending well, and I'm going to just work with you all. There's no such thing as a bad question, and, which is just like this sort of more like loving approach, versus
there are bad questions.
The way where it's like, and then sometimes it's like, no, like, hey, you keep making this about something that we're not talking about. We're going to point out that you keep taking this far afield, and we're going to either time you out or discourage it. But here's why, though. And I just want to say why. And this is why a lot of autistic people love Theory Underground. I was homeschooled, and that's kind of like being autistic. So, my siblings are all like, every once in a while I get someone, Dave, you might be autistic. I did an online thing and I might be autistic. Dave, you might be too. You get this kind of thing. And then people will be like, oh no, it's ADHD. Well, yeah, what a lot of people are calling neurodivergence is actually just like not normal socialization. It's just that is often what's going on. And there's various ways that you can go from being like confused about social dynamics into being an adult. And you can just kind of get confused about them and then avoid them after that. Or you could kind of like try to develop some set of principles to navigate certain situations. And then you can like, realize different situations are different, and develop some kind of a working understanding, which I did. And I would put myself in uncomfortable situations all the time. And most of my siblings did not have that impulse to put themselves in these uncomfortable situations repeatedly. Like if it was just too weird and I was always embarrassed and the people were mean to me, I would go find a different social situation and I would try that out for a while. And then until I could almost go anywhere and hang out with almost anybody. And that probably took 5 years of trial and error. And it was not an easy process going from being an extremely easily embarrassed and awkward little teenager into being like someone who could like walk into almost any situation. I'm not saying I can still, but you know what? I could get in a situation and then someone can like, and I can be actually embarrassed and someone can be purposefully or accidentally humiliating me. And it's not obvious anymore because my ears used to turn red. I used to get like shaky. Like, no, there's a way of being present in a situation and you can roll with it. But you know what would have fucking helped me a lot in those 5 years? If people had communicated with me about what was going on, because I didn't know. I didn't know. The coolest people, the people I appreciated the most, were the ones who were blunt assholes who in the moment I was like, oh, fuck this person. And then later I was like, but I'm glad they told me. Cause like there's this one person who's like, why do you move so much? Like you move so much, like everyone else, like, look, do you see everyone is like hanging out and chilling and you're like fidgety. And if that person hadn't called me out, like when I was like, I don't know, 14 or 15, look, did I ever want to hang out with them again? No, I did not want to hang out with them again. Bridge burned. I'm out. But guess what? I learned from it. And I adapted. And all of that is to say, it is from the deepest place of compassion that I am blunt and honest with people about how they come off to me. I can't tell you why you do what you do, but I can tell you how it comes off. And I've been through enough social situations now, and I've been online enough with chats and stuff that I kind of have a sense for what's appropriate and what's not. And I'll say it. And part of my brand that has gone too far sometimes is to just err on the side of, I'm not going to leave you wondering what I think, guys. I'm not going to like have you be, because online it's worse. In real life, it's easier because you can meet up with a person, you can kind of embodied work it out, which just being in the same space and voice and stuff helps. But online, I kind of just assume everyone's autistic, which means you probably actually need to hear it. I can't just infer it. I can't just normalize with demeanor. I actually just have to say what the thing is. And look, there's going to be people who are deeply offended by that, who think that that's not how you should deal with these situations. But the people who appreciate it. And it is a work in progress. But yeah, it does come from a place of compassion. It just might not feel like that.
That's really interesting, Dave. I had never heard you describe why you do it. And it makes a certain amount of sense. Yeah, it is different from what my instinct would be, which is usually to just not pay attention to stuff unless I have a good reason to.
Yeah, Nance?
No, but No, it's too big to contain in the final part of this episode, but it is very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts about it in like disposition, background, constitution, befindlichkeit itself, right? Like this is how like we carry ourselves through the world. This is our comportment. And I think the recognition that we are all suffering from a lack of recognition. We are all free floating. We are all asking the question, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? We're all there. I think we all know it. We all recognize it. And there are many, many, many ways to kind of just disavow it or just be like, yeah, fuck it, whatever. But I do think like that's a part of the meta theorizing that we're doing at Theory Underground as well. Like recognizing like who are we as digital subjects? Like what are we? What makes us tick? What is happening to us? We are no longer just an animal. We are no longer just a languaged ape. We are now a languaged ape that has the internet fucking strapped to their fucking body 24/7, and there's no going back. And how is it changing norms? And how is it changing sense of self, identity? Like that's a part of it too. And I don't know, like it's funny to make jokes, but it's also like a deep, serious thing. And I do think compassion is usually always the best answer. It's always better to err on the side of compassion. And I think everyone at Theory Underground is habituated into compassion. I think we all kind of approach it from our own angles, but I think we're all compassionate people.
Yeah. There can be this, if you ask yourself to deal with something over and over and over again, and it's not something that you like to deal with, there can be this rebellion against that, which could take the form of not handling it the way that you should. So in my case, if I were to watch the chat all the time and engage all the time with the comments, I would reach a point of annoyance with it because it would be disrupting my ability to think in the way that I want to about the things that I want to think about with the people I want to think about. You know, it would be these, I would treat the comments as interruptions. And I would get annoyed with them.
They often are.
Right? Yeah. And I might be able to, once in a while handle it well, but...
I'm sorry, it's getting choppy again, so I didn't realize I was interrupting you.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
But I want to. So Jacob, who is Asaphale Winter, by the way, folks, said, "Do you think I pay $30 a month because I don't want Nance to be my cyber friend?" But that was a reaction to the.
I thought
you met Jacob Benjamin at TUCon. And then Jacob said, most of what I have to say in the chat is for other folks in the chat. I never want to derail a conversation on stream that I'm a part of, that I'm not a part of. And I just want to say, I need to come to terms with the medium itself. The chat is for people who are following the conversation and having another conversation at the same time. It's like you are texting in church, and that is okay. Now, of course, the church is different, but it is like, well, texting in a classroom. Could you follow a lecture and be texting in the classroom? I want to say yes, though it's going to be more difficult. And I want to say, of course, it's going to be more difficult for the professor to be teaching when a bunch of students are texting, and it would be much more hard for that professor if those texts were on a projector at the back of the room. And so you could see everything that they were saying impulsively off the top of their head.
So in fairness, the podcasts are not lectures, right? The podcasts are not teaching. The podcasts are let's
That's right.
Show people how what we do enables us to talk about what's going on in such a way that we are protected from the stupid shit, right? Let's show people that there is a way of approaching this that's better. And we can do that with them talking about it on their own and in sometimes it can be instructive in various ways, even to bring it in or interface with it. But for me, I would have a hard time if I watched the chat all the time, distinguishing when to interact from when not to, and there would be a kind of, I would get overwhelmed eventually by it. I would lose the ability to make the decision over and over and over again. It would become overstimulating to me, and I would have to just throw up my hands. And I do. I just don't take comments. Like on my Substack, I don't take comments unless you're a paid subscriber.
I figured out a way to get around that just recently with someone else's Substack. All you have to do is restack it with a note.
But at least then you have to share it.
This is true. Then at least you're spreading their work, their original work, along with your thoughts. So maybe
that's fine.
Maybe that's a better way
Restack it
to
with a
comment
note.
anyway, as opposed to just doing the static comment section. Maybe if it's a
Admit
good piece,
that it was interesting enough that you engaged with it. Admit it by sharing it.
I like it. You can't hide from it.
Hey, I don't want to cut this off short, but I do have to say one quick thing, and then we do have to switch out because Benjamin's going to be up to do a presentation. And so I'll let you guys say your closing thoughts for this episode. But really quick, I just want to say, the chat as a perpetual misrecognition mechanism within the dynamic, and having a principled way of dealing with it. This is all something that I've obviously been thinking a lot about ever since I started streaming on Twitch back in the day, which was way worse. And it was way worse. You are all neurotypicals compared to Twitch, let me tell you. But on that, Asafail said, autists do love Theory Underground, and then asked, does interacting with chat turn one into Vosh after a fashion? And I think so.
Yes.
Hawes, when Hawes was on with us, he said that, I was telling him I'm not even going to look at chat because his people are crazy and they're just blowing it up. And he's like, oh, you get used to it. And I said, I don't want to, man. I don't want to.
No, that response blew my mind. You get used to it. Jesus Christ. I don't ever want to get used to the weird shit people say in chat. No, not to insult you guys who are in chat because, the Theory Underground chat is relatively good. But my God, no, I don't ever want to get used to that. Ever. I never want to give that much time to just whatever it is that the people who watch me are talking about while I'm talking. No. Oh my God, can you imagine? You would never be able to think ever. You would be completely stymied, and every time you start to think, there would be a response immediately, and you would, oh God, can you imagine such a thing?
I wonder how plastic the human brain is, and I wonder how plastic kind of subjectivity and the ego is, because it is true that you do get used to it. And I don't know, the world today, there's one in chat right now. The world today is,
there is.
the speed is just so different. The speed at which the world comes at you is very, very different. And there's something in me that wants to recoil and be afraid to do an alarmism and say, oh, it's the end of the world, kind of like they did when radio was invented and television, even the printing press and newspapers, writing itself. They were like, oh no, we're going to write stuff down. We won't be able to remember everything. There's always this notion of, do we want to pay the price for the future when it comes to subjectivity and memory and stuff like this? And it's a good question to ask. And I'm not sure if we want to pay the price, but I am sure that we are going to have no choice soon. It's going to just be an implicit cost in modern life. And I see it in my kids, and I have to always not do the alarmism. I have to always say, no, but they're actually still really smart, and we can have a complex, multivariate conversation There are differences, and it's understanding the differences.
It's a different kind of subject with different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
The digital subject, the 21st century subject, is different.
Yeah.
Not altogether in a bad way, although that's what's going to stand out to us. It's
Yes.
the things that we can do that they can't that we'll notice.
Yep.
The things that they can do that we can't, we don't think of those as things.
Okay, we better go.
All
Gotta do
right.
Benjamin's thing. Richard
All right.
Oakes asked a great question about recognition and how we're using the term, and if we're using it like Benjamin and Haneth, or if we're using it in some other way. And I would just say there are several meanings, and every time I've used it today, I did mean all of them, but the kind of recognition I care about is only 1 out of like 4. And like the kind I care about personally, the kind that I want, is 1 out of 4. And that the other kinds, I care about them because of how they matter institutionally, how they matter politically, what they do to people, which is a separate thing. And yes, something that I'll have to get into during my lectures over the next year. So thank you for the great question, Richard. That's one of those clarifying questions that really adds something special.
In my case, I'm thinking very much about time, the Greek term for honor, and rule by the honor lovers and the honor loving type, right? And this is
Which
one
we're
of the
gonna go
things
here.
that people need. We're going to talk about it. Yeah.
All right. Swap over to the PSA.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll be back, guys.
You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon.
But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback, and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory, the CCRU versus Ljubljana school, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and look, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on, an interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah, so the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university, they criticize the left, they don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube, and they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.